welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Vianora Vinca. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion that Barack Obama will get overwhelming support from African American voters at the polls this November. But what about other ethnic groups? Where do they stand on the candidates? What are their issues? Do they have issues that go beyond politics? On this edition of Independent Sources, we continue our campaign coverage and talk with two journalists about what's being reported in the ethnic media and what they're hearing from voters in their communities, including views on the sensitive subjects of race and religion. Independent Sources co-host Garry Pierre-Pierre talks with a Georgian journalist who writes for a Russian-American newspaper about a conflict thousands of miles away and the repercussions here. Plus, we visit Radio Soleil, the Brooklyn-based station where Haitians tune in for news about their hard-hit country. But first, the ethnic vote. It could help swing the election this November. To get a sense of what voters are seeing in the ethnic media and saying in their communities, I'm joined by Abu Taher of Bangla Patrika, a newspaper serving the Bangladeshi and Indian communities, and Carolina González, a freelance journalist and co-author of Nueva York, the complete guide to Latino life in the 5 boroughs. Welcome.
Thank you.
Abu Taher, what are the issues that interest the Muslim American community in this election?
What I found as a reporter that the Muslims, they are thinking about the basically the civil rights, in this election, their main issues, because I found in Denver Convention and a Republican Convention, St. Paul, that there was 2 Muslim caucus there, and they are talking about the same issue, that civil liberties should be the first issue. We have to restore the civil liberties because the people came in this country, they are persecuted and all this thing happen in their country, back their country. They came here to enjoy the freedom. And in this country, they are not thinking that they are free like who they are thought, when they left their country. So if the civil liberty is restored, then they can, take a breath and, they will feel like they are free and they can talk whatever they want to do, they can do it. So I think the civil liberty is the main issue in this election by the Muslims. As a reporter, I feel that,
So it would mean that they are not very supportive of the current administration and they're leaning more towards Barack Obama?
I think in this election, they are not if I talk about the Muslim community or Bangladeshi community, they are not thinking about the religion or anything in this election. They are thinking about the issues, and they find the Barack Obama is better candidate than John McCain. But if they talk about the principle and the other issues, then there is a lot of similarity with Republican, party also. Like, the Muslim community, they don't believe on abortion. They believe on family values. They don't like the other thing which is very close to Republican. But the basic fundamental issues they are talking about, the change and all these things, they found the Barack Obama, who whatever he is talking about, it is very close to them. And they are feeling associated with Barack Obama's campaign. So I think Barack Obama will get most of the vote from the Muslim community this year.
And how has the Muslim media been covering these issues?
The Muslim media, they are covering the both candidates. It's not like they are covering just Barack Obama. They are covering Barack Obama. They are covering John McCain. They are covering the issues, and they are telling the people or readers that, look, this is the issue and this is the principle of the both candidates. So you have to choose which one you like. And this year, I think the most of the Muslim, they are thinking the country the leadership should change. If we vote John McCain, it will be the same thing, like there will be extension of Bush, because John McCain, right now, he's not talking about change or anything, or what what will be the change between him and George Bush. He's still is not clear.
Particularly in regards to civil rights.
Yes, in regards to civil rights,
yeah. Carolina González, how important is this election to the Latino voters?
It's hugely important, the way it is to anybody who lives in this country. I think you know, it's very funny because every 4 year cycle, there's always this big question of like, where's the Latino vote going to go? What is the Latino vote doing? And frankly, personally, I find it a little amusing that after so many election cycles, I would say like certainly the last 3 or 4 election cycles, nobody still has a clue, or at least the mainstream media does not really have a clue as to how to talk about the Latino vote and how to talk about what those voters are thinking about.
It's been reported that in 2004, as many as 40% of the Latino votes went to the Republicans. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this time around is going to be less than that? What are the issues facing the mm-hmm. Latino community that they're interested in?
Well, if you look at the coverage in the mainstream media, the coverage around the Latino vote tends to be specifically centered around immigration, as if that were the only issue that Latino voters care about. But when you look at, when you look at polls that have been done either by the Pew Hispanic Institute or NALEO or any number of organizations that are a little bit more sophisticated at how to poll Latino voters, what you see is that the top issues that emerge for them are familiar to the average voter. It's the Iraq War, the economy, jobs, and yes, immigration is a big issue, but it is not, the be-all and end-all.
Has it always been like this, or has it in the previous election, like 2004, mm-hmm. maybe immigration played a bigger role, and now because of the condition of the economy took first place?
I don't think so. I mean, if you go back even to, sort of the mid-90s, even before Bush got elected the first time around, the concerns of the Latino community did have to do with labor and immigration tied together. Because if you remember, in the late 90s, we're seeing the fallout from NAFTA, and those communities are the ones who were seeing that fallout first. So they were really much more on top of it.
We're going to take a break and be right back.
Every time trees are destroyed to make paper, we lose something that can't be replaced.
You have the power to stop this.
Insist that the paper you buy is tree-free.
Insist on.
Help us win the paper campaign.
Welcome back to Independent Sources. I'm talking with Abu Taher and Carolina González about the ethnic vote in November. Reporters from the ethnic media participated on a panel on Barack Obama at the Democratic National Convention in Denver. One of the main issues was race and whether certain ethnic voters would support a black man for president. Here's a couple of clips from that panel.
I don't think the Chinese community really fully ready for black to be the president of the United States, even though Obama is mixed with white and black. And from the eyes of the Chinese community, people look at Obama as like a black.
There is an issue with his race. I think among some Latinos, I don't think it's a significant amount, but there are some Latinos, and we do know that when we go to Latin America, we see racial hierarchy there. So there are some that might be suspicious because of his race, but I don't think that's a large amount, but there are some.
The reporter from the Chinese newspaper says that the Chinese community, for instance, is not ready for mm-hmm. a black president, mm-hmm. and the journalist from La Opinión says that there is an issue with Obama's mm-hmm. race. Is there?
To say that there isn't an issue would be a lie, right? But I think that, partly by the mainstream, primarily by the mainstream media, it's a point that's been overstated, the extent to which Latinos would categorically not vote for a black man for president. Just starting with the fact that a lot of Latinos are black, and people from the Caribbean, you just have this sort of black-white racial spectrum that, black people are not unfamiliar to us. I think this is one of those instances where you really see how looking at Latinos as one undifferentiated group gets you into problems. Because if you talk about, recent immigrants, most of whom, by the way, cannot vote, and then you talk about people who've been born and raised here, people who've been raised or have lived a long time in places where they are having significant interaction with the African American community, where there is a lot of mixing between Latinos of different shades and blacks. You know, all this gets kind of parceled out very differently. And even sometimes people that will kind of say to you, because I actually had this conversation in my own family, where people who will say to you, you know, I'm not sure whether I should vote for Barack because he's a moreno, he's a black man. But once you have a conversation with people about like, well, this is what the issues are, and this is what this candidate stands for, they say like, oh, well, then maybe he doesn't sound so bad now, you know. So I think this idea of Latinos categorically not voting for Barack Obama based on race is something that really needs to kind of be teased out and parsed out a little bit more.
And you were talking about the mainstream media overemphasizing the race issue, but back during the primaries, what the mainstream media was doing was only talking, I mean, overemphasizing, like you say, the so-called black-brown divide. And we've touched upon this a little bit in our previous episode of Independent Sources. What is your take on that? Is there a black-brown divide, though? Well,
I mean, I think, you know, I think part of the issue that that you had to look at in terms of sort of when the issue was between two Democratic candidates, and one of them was Hillary Clinton, and one of them was Barack Obama, things would get explained as being it's the white woman versus the black man in terms of how the Latino community looked at the two candidates. But no, what was really going on was that it was the candidate that had done a lot of work in the Latino community and that Latinos were very familiar with, from her own prominence in the national stage and from, her husband's 2 terms as president and in a presidency that was very involved with Latin America versus somebody that to them was really very much an unknown quantity.
So the divide was based on the policies? You're saying it was not based on race? Saying
that that race was the tipping factor, I think is overstating it.
Here's another clip from the DNC panel, this time on the issue of Muslim Americans.
So far, Obama's track record is not very impressive as far as reaching out to the Pakistani community or the Muslim community at large is concerned. There are suspicions, there are reservations, but there is a big hope as well because of the larger message of Obama, which is very positive.
So, Abu, not only that, as perceived, Obama has not reached out to the Muslim community, but he is known to have repeatedly denied that he is a Muslim. What does the community say about that?
The election itself is not an issue of Muslim or Christian or Jews. Okay, so I think it's not among the Muslim community. It's not an issue that whether he's a Muslim or he's a Christian or he's a Jews. It's an election of an issue. I think there is a reaction among the Muslims, but it's not huge. There is some people they are irritating by the comments of Barack Obama. But what most of the Muslim I found they are dreaming a change, which the country should go to the right direction, because the war, the economy, the education, and the labor issue and other issue, the falling down the economy and all these things. People are thinking that their dream is, broke down by the administration and by the government. We have to think about the future of this country, not a person.
And that takes first place ahead of religion.
There is some people they're thinking the religion, as a Muslim might be. This is the first time a person become the president of the United States who are not a Muslim, but his father was a Muslim. So he has a little bit orientation about the Muslim culture and religion. So it's better than any other candidate that a person I'm voting who is familiar with the Muslim culture. So it's a very small kind of people. But most of the people, they're not thinking about the religion or anything. They're thinking about the issues.
Carolina, how relevant is religion, Catholic or evangelical, with its implication on the abortion issue?
Well, I thought it was very telling looking at the reporter who talks about, like, well, you know, the Obama campaign has not done a lot of outreach to the Pakistani community. And I think for the level of sophistication of the electorate, of all the different, you know, if you want to call it ethnic electorates, the outreach from either campaign has been really lackadaisical. So that, you know, this appeal to values voters, because that's basically what you're doing when you're trying to get somebody to vote based on an issue like abortion. The appeals to values voters, I think, have been, fairly unsophisticated. And while that remains a very important issue for, you know, for hardcore Catholics, and here again we're talking about primarily recent immigrants who again are not necessarily the ones voting. And then you do of course have you know, evangelical Christians who then, you know, again, I'm really shocked that the Republicans have not appealed to them the way that it would make sense they would, given that so much of their core is evangelical Christians. Mm-hmm. But they have not, I don't see that they've reached out or that they've worked with Latino evangelicals to the extent that you would think they would. So while these issues remain important, I think that voters overall are kind of looking at sort of harder issues rather than the cultural issues. That, again, the cultural issues are not the determining factor for a lot of the voters.
I'm going to close with a question to Abu Taher. At a conference in Denver, Congressman Keith Ellison, who's a Muslim, said the United States is the place of possibility for Muslims. What do you think he meant by that?
He meant that I was attending this program, and what he talked that if we talk about the Islam always, you know, emphasize about the humanity, the mankind, and I think this is the country people needs help, people need support, and if they help people, this is the real spirit of Islam, this is the real spirit of the you know, Muslims, that okay, we are not here that only for religious talk, we are here to help the humanity and mankind.
Carolina González and Abu Taher, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic media. A phony immigration lawyer is heading to prison. From the Irish Voice, Ralph Cuccinella was sentenced to 20 years in jail after scamming several undocumented Irish immigrants out of $500,000. The 50-year-old con man claimed he would get his victims green cards within a year. The Hip Hop Summit Action Network says, get your house right. Our Time Press reports that the organization will tour the nation with several real estate professionals to educate young blacks and Latinos on the importance of home ownership and avoiding foreclosures. Are Spanish radio stations in danger? In an opinion piece for El Diario La Prensa, Councilmember Maria del Carmen Arroyo says the new method of measuring radio listeners caused a dip in ratings for several of New York's Spanish stations. The new system no longer requires participants to write down what they listen to. Instead, an electronic device records the stations they hear directly and indirectly. Should the MTA give pre-recorded messages a rest? Some commuters say they'd rather hear a human voice when trains are delayed. That from the Brooklyn View. And finally, having the heart of a pope isn't too far-fetched. The Italian Tribune reports that Pope Benedict registered to be an organ donor. He said donating one's organs is an act of love. Those are just a few headlines from New York's ethnic media. Back to you, Vianora.
Thanks, Abby. The conflict between Russia and Georgia has been a major story in mainstream media. For the Russian media, it has been the story. Leah Moses is a journalist with Russian Reklama, a Brooklyn-based newspaper. She is also from Georgia. Garry Pierre-Pierre talked with Moses about how the conflict was covered in her paper and how it played out in New York's Russian immigrant community.
Just recently, you had a big story. Russia invaded Georgia. How did you cover this at your newspaper?
We had two interesting discussions, and it was about our community and the conflict in Russia or in Georgia. Because, you know, the so-called Russian community is not really Russian. There are people from various, from all Soviet republics, former Soviet republics. The majority of the community are Jewish refugees from the former Soviet Union, and there are also people, ethnic Georgians, ethnic Armenians, ethnic Ukrainians, ethnic Russian, and so on. And so the first discussion was about will this war divide our community like it divided people in post-Soviet countries. Ethnic Russians were, the majority of them were pro-Russia, and others were pro-Georgia and pro-Western. And also about the reasons and the possible consequences of the conflict. And we had, various opinions. People were very passionate. Some of them were, just ordinary people who we met in the street. Others were the so-called leaders of our community, and they were, it was a real debate, passionate debate. Some of them said that this is a beginning of the end of Russia. The others said this is the beginning of the end of Georgia.
But ultimately, what kind of coverage emerged out of the discussions within the staff here? What stories did you publish?
We published very interesting stories, and we also translated stories from mainstream media.
Give me some example of the interesting stories that you published.
The most interesting original stories of our newspaper, one of them was about the possible division in our community, and the second one was, are Russians for Russia? This is the title of the second discussion, because there are several organizations in our community that were always pro-Russian. They were trying to, maintain ties with our so-called former motherland and so on. And the second discussion was also very interesting and also very passionate.
Now, it's been a little while, a month or so, since the conflict ended. Have you been following the story, and what kind of stories have you published?
We are writing various stories. For example, in this is the last issue. It is called the Cautious Advisors of Georgia. It has some facts from Georgian history when in the past Georgia is a Christian country, and it was always invaded, by Muslim neighbors from Iran and from Turkey, and sometimes it hoped, Georgia's leaders and kings, they hoped that Christian Russia will help them. Sometimes they were disappointed. And the same story can be repeated now, because now democratic Georgia hopes that the democratic America will help it.
Your readers, what kind of feedback did you receive from them? Letters, calls, emails? Just tell me about that.
Calls, emails, yes. And again, they...
Where did it come down? What side did it come down? What were their reactions to?
Both sides. For example, we had a priest from Ossetia, a Christian priest from Ossetia, who wrote that there really was a genocide of Ossetian people and so on. At the same time, we had a guy from California who wrote that there was not a real invasion, it was a reaction.
Are you planning any stories on this issue for the near future?
Yes, I think because it was very important for so-called Russian community, because as I told you,
it's not just Russian.
It's not just Russian, yes, and it became so important that maybe even people forgot about presidential elections and this...
You're talking about the U.S. presidential elections?
Yes, the U.S. presidential elections, and they are still discussing this.
We'll be right back.
There is really only one boy, one girl, one tree, one forest, one ocean, one mountain, one sky, and one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
We end our show with a profile of Radio Soleil, a station based in Brooklyn. Right now, Haiti is struggling to recover after being devastated by a battery of tropical storms and hurricanes. It seems this impoverished Caribbean country is always being hard hit, often by storms of a political nature. By providing news and opening its phone lines, Radio Soleil has become a lifeline for Haitians here to events back home. Zyphus Lebrun reports.
A quick goodbye to his wife, and Pierre Cime is off to work, his trusty transistor radio in hand. Despite having a working radio in his cab, Cime carries his 13-year-old tape deck because it's the only way he can listen to his favorite station, Radio Soleil.
If New York City have 500,000 Haitian or a million, maybe 90% listen to Radio Soleil.
Radio Soleil d'Haïti, il fait exactement midi et 10 minutes. Nous en contact direct avec Haïti, et le pays qui vit une partie grave de sa vie politique.
Soleil opened in 1991 and is one of the 7 Haitian radio stations in New York. Senior reporter and general manager Ricot Dupuy has been with Soleil since its first broadcast, covering news from Haiti and here in the United States that the mainstream press does not.
Haitians live for news because this is a country that has been in turmoil for the longest time. I mean, they live their life with the constant hope that they come home from work and they turn on the station, they will hear some positive news.
Et je dis à nous tendez situation, c'est des irrégularités de toutes sortes. Le vote est certainement massif.
We could give you news from the world news, like Ted Couple. Like Ted Couple, like Peter Jenny, like that.
Cime is one of the many Haitians in New York who rely on low-frequency stations like Radio Soleil for their news. This continues a practice started in Haiti during the transistor revolution of the 80s. It was a time when Haitian journalists broadcast over a pirated signal in their native Creole, rather than the elitist French programming sponsored by the Duvalier government.
The press was not free, and the government was very suspicious of people that were listening to the press, specifically to newscasts. But the people started to challenge this state of affairs, so people started really to invest, to save the money, to buy a receiver. And buying a receiver means it's a door to freedom.
Freedom Cime continues to enjoy every day as he listens to news and his favorite music, Zouk and Kadas.
Oh, this is Zouk. This is Zouk from Martinique. You get news from your country? That's your mother. Yep, you listen to your mother every morning.
In spite of such kudos, Radio Soleil struggles to stay alive. Much of the overhead is paid through community businesses, advertising over the station, and religious groups who pay for airtime.
It's a struggle. It's commercial, but the objective is really to help the community. So a lot of times you end up expending energies that does not reward you in financial terms, but reward you so much in other ways.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. And remember, be independent-minded.